Well, thanks very much, Karen. I just, by way of introduction, just firstly wanted to make known who we are. We've got a subject matter expert today, Mr. Dan Ingvarson. He's here mainly because he's part of the EdSAFE AI Alliance, hosts both myself from Wollongong and Dr. Doug Ashley, who's acting as an independent consultant, Frank Brooks, and our Zoom wrangler, of course, is Karen. By way of introduction, I just wanted to give some background to who Dan is. Firstly, he's had a long career in technological innovation in Australia, and he's been at the vanguard of the integration of technology within the education sector since well before the birth of the internet. He's been a software developer, company founder, a solutions architect, integration specialist, consultant, and policy advisor. He's well known for his contribution to the provision of safe internet access and online learning tools for school students within Australia and internationally, and the development of the National Schools Interoperability Program run by Education Services Australia. He's recently completed a master's degree in data analytics and psychometrics. He's the senior technical advisor to the EdSAFE AI Alliance. And as part of that work, he's recently engaged with senior executives from education systems across the globe as they navigate their way forward in responding to artificial intelligence in education. Just recently, he got flown to London to meet senior education officials in the UK as they begin to work out and develop policy frameworks for AI within their jurisdictions. EdSAFE AI Alliance is an international non-aligned, not-for-profit advocacy group specifically constituted to raise and address the unique challenges AI presents in education. Dan also has been appointed just recently a special advisor to Google's Gen AI Advisory Board. So I think you'd all agree it's really good to have Dan here and for him to make his time available to us this afternoon. Dr. Doug Ashley is working with me on this presentation. Doug's probably well known to many of us. He's worked across numerous diocesan education systems and religious institute school systems. He's a former IT manager, head of learning. He's been a regional advisor and most recently been the Deputy Executive Director at Brisbane Catholic Education. So I welcome you both. I know that AI in education is front of mind. Almost every day there's a new article in the paper around some of the pitfalls of AI and some of the excitement and the benefits that it might bring. We recently had a presentation from Mark Woolley in a CNET Learning Online session about the utilisation of ChatGPT specifically. But this afternoon, we wanted to broaden the conversation about AI in general and its broader application in education, and some of the governance issues that it might raise for us as we move forward. I'm going to ask Dan now to do a short presentation. During that presentation, as Karen said, it might prompt some chat questions that will be curated, and there might be an opportunity for Dan to address them after Doug and I ask some specific questions of Dan. So Dan, without further ado, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great to see everyone here. Thank you, B. Thank you, Doug, and the whole crew. This is slightly longer than the short presentation. We sort of embellished it as we went along. So there'll be some pause points in there as well. So we're going to be looking at the scale and scope of the underlying change that's happened and the core issues that we face. Then we're going to take you on a short learning journey so that you'll be able to be experts in Gen AI by the end of it, and that will hopefully equip you to engage with some of the needed policy discussion that we will have. And then finally, we're going to look at a three-step process that is part of the framework for policy development that's been developed. So, what's it all about at the moment? Why is everyone talking about it? So, I like to put it like this. We're standing on a precipice. It's like the final shift in technology. It's the Fukuyama of digital. And I think it's going to be a structural change for each of the processes within education systems themselves. It used to take 15 years to get an AI to be sort of human performance in certain categories. It now takes a few months. The speed of change is astronomical. Every week there are massive changes. And this is a picture of the AIs, and we're going to call these large language models that are coming down the pipeline or exist right now. You'll see up in the right, at the top left-hand corner is BERT. If you had an autocomplete from Google today, where it was guessing your words, that was BERT. BERT is actually an AI. It's not a very big AI, but neither was GTP3. That was only this big. So there is a huge number of bigger, badder, and more complicated learning large language models coming down the pipeline. But something happened on March 17th of this year that will change everything. We don't know what ChatGPT is made up of. We don't know what's in it, how it works. They stopped telling us. They stopped being public about how these things worked. And what was kicked off was a cannonball run for $1 trillion industry that is going to change lots and lots of things about what we do. So we're probably at a point right now where we've got inflated expectations about what it can achieve, and it's going to go through some time where it doesn't do as well with things. And you can already see that with people saying it doesn't tell the truth, it hallucinates, quality is low. You know, there's a range of things that are going to happen. But we do know that with this kind of a change, that there will be a growth out of that. And we're going to talk a bit about how that might look, what might be on the slope of enlightenment for education at the end of the presentation. So this, if you're not aware, IBM has said that they're going to cut a vast amount of their workforce because of this. Now, if you can imagine that happened in education, they just got up and said, a third of you are going to go. We talk about, 3 or 5% changes at a time. This is a massive change. One of the largest edtech businesses in the world lost 70% of their value since ChatGPT. It's shaking up the whole entire market. I think you've all heard about the fact that AI can copy voices. It can now, people are ringing people, getting their voicemails, and that is enough time and enough information to actually go and copy somebody's voice. And then they're able to make phone calls and pretend to be your kids or your parents or others and ask you for passport details, for bank details and other things like that. And in schools, we're seeing the creation of deep fakes that have already got teachers being fired because and they're reinstated, but because they were mistaken for being truth, and many others that we're seeing where parents are doing things. So we have an entire ecosystem of misuse that can be made. So to put that in context, when we first had sort of data and AIs, it was with social media, and its purpose was to keep you engaged. But what happened was a range of second-order effects. These sort of second-order effects are things that people may be familiar with, where particularly fake news and the like. And what they're saying is that there's a second set of issues for us to start worrying about in terms of trust collapse and the A to Z of everything on alpha persuade, which is where the AI becomes very good at persuading you of things, and you may not even know that it's trying to persuade you. So we'll talk a little bit about those later on, because that's just a set to get you set up for why do we need to do some action? Why is it so important? We don't currently have transparency of what they're trained on and how they work. We have a lack of age-consented, appropriate consents. We have systems that don't necessarily legislate having humans in the loop. And as we said, there's a nefarious use that can be made and biases that could potentially limit learning. So what are some of those biases? You might be familiar with these. These are mid-journey photos. It's just slightly off the bottom, unfortunately. See, the one on the left is a happy person and the one on the right is a sad person. All the happy are male, or most of the sad are female. That's what it does each time if you ask it. So if I ask it, give me a nurse, I get the ones on the left. If I give me a doctor, I give the ones on the right. Notice anything about those? Now, there's an issue with that because that's what it's learned from what's out there. So Midjourney's creator says there's no easy way for us to change the bias because that's what's there. So if we want diversity, then we would actually break the AI algorithms. And we'll learn a bit more about the AI algorithms right now. Okay, so this is a 5-minute smash through that you're going to become experts at the end of this. So hang on, this will be quite fun, but we're going to get through all of these topics. So first of all, how do they work? How are they made? They are made by trying to guess the next word. So can you please come? And if it gets it right, it updates the network. And if it gets it wrong, it updates the network, just different ways. And it does that for every web page, every Wikipedia article, every science article, every Reddit article, and then all of the rest of the quality internet they call it. But we don't know what quality internet means. But it basically includes all books, all kinds of things. So every single word that we've basically written ever down is pumped into these machines time after time after time to make it better at guessing what it should do as the next word. And interestingly, people actually work quite like that. Let me explain. So what it does is after doing that collection, it creates a network. This is a probabilistic network. See, my favorite color is red, is the most likely run through there from the training that it's done. So when you hear things like parameters and tokens, really all they're talking about is the breakdown of the words and how the words work and the links between them. How likely is the connection between these different components? So that's the probabilistic network. That's what sits underneath all of these things. Then we get to the transformers. Now, this is for illustrative purposes only. You might remember that GTP stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And a transformer is something that takes an input and turns it into an output. So when we type, "Hi, how are you?" Hi gets broken into a set of numbers. And so do all the other words. And then it gets fed in to the transformer, and the most likely answer comes out. I am fine. So it's actually a matrix calculation. So if any of you can remember back to matrix maths, you'll remember a thing called a vector. That is what your prompt gets turned into. You type in a prompt and it gets turned into a string of numbers, which is a vector, and it multiplies that with the probabilistic network, and boom, you get the answer. Now, I noticed there's a few more complications in there, but at a simple level, that's it. So let me give you an example to take away. If I say to you cat, dog, and then I say the word food, all of a sudden, a whole lot of probabilities and things in your mind have been drawn to something. And you and I could have a conversation about that without any other structure. We could be on point and related. I could also then say cat, dog, fine, and we'd be able to have a completely different conversation, maybe about civics, maybe about cleaning up after your dog. But what we've done by creating that context, and that's called context, inside of the conversation is to refine the multiplication. That's really what you're doing. So it's like a debug, but there's more to it than that. So what's sort of happened when the thing that's blown everything up was it started out as a simple kind of response thing, but as they made it bigger as they got more and more words and more items, they realized it wasn't words and items, it was actually concepts. It was actually the things underlying the words. It was actually the nature of what exists. Because when I go and I have a conversation in French or I have a conversation in English, we're actually talking about a table. It's a concept. So we can have the same conversation, the same things exist, the same concepts exist. Words are a manifestation of concepts. And so by teaching it about all of that, it was able to all of a sudden learn a whole lot about concepts and a whole lot about inference and a whole lot about other things as a result. So it just taught itself Persian. That was just something just happened. But interestingly, we actually don't know what these emergent factors are. They just emerge. It's like shipping software, and the software writers don't actually know the feature set. So there's features they continue to find inside of the way these things work because nobody really knows how they work. Now we're actually getting better at some of that, and we're seeing some topping, some rounding off. What's happening is we're getting a sort of a topping off of how big these things are. They're not going to go endlessly, but they're not at the end yet. We're seeing Google create small models as well as big models. And so we're seeing that big cavalcade of items that are coming is just the beginning. There is stacks more of them on their way. So what are people doing to make them work a little better? So if they're just kind of like a multiplication thing, what we can do, if people understand how a database query works, like you ask a question and you get an answer, right? And we do that with databases all day long. And we get lots of those sort of things. So people have learned that what we can do is take a prompt and refine it so we get a better answer. And this is going on and on and on. So if you actually type in these words, let's work this out step by step to make sure we get the right answer, your answer will be better. And then if you take the answer and put it back in and say, hey, can you find the flaws in that answer? It will find the flaws in it. And then if you ask it, take your first answer, look at the flaws and create me a better answer at the end, it improves it again. So we're finding ways to interact with this model that improves its quality dramatically. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the wider models later. So what's happening is we're now able to load documents and create prompts in a kind of chain of discussion that goes on so that you actually are almost able to chat with your database and chat with the using the large language model to make sense of it. So one of the last sort of technical slides. So when the large language model is made, it is frozen. That means ChatGPT was the underlying model, the GTP4 was frozen in August 2021. And see here, I've got tunable soft prompt. This is like adding those prompts at the top. So when you go to type in a prompt, now what people have got is it automatically adds those other quality prompts to it. So it's scaffolding what you're typing. It scaffolds it with local documents, local contexts, and makes the response much more custom to your circumstances. But then they are also producing models that can be yours if you've got a lot of money, that are able to be tuned, and we are able to control what truth is for your circumstance. So you actually are able to create different versions with different truths. So we're always going to have this thing, called hallucination. It's where it's basically because the LLMs are a bit lazy, right? So they go to the easiest answer, and if they don't know, it's easier just to sort of fill it in. But those kind of those answers mean that if we were trying to judge the quality of an LLM, and we can make the quality different and better by how we ask the question, then how do we know when the LLM is being high quality or not? Is it the prompt? You know, is it the one of the analogies I use is, you know, for responsibility is cars, you know, so LLMs, if they were a car and you had the car manufacturer, would you hold them responsible for the driving of the drivers who drive the car? So at what point is the LLM in control versus the context that you're giving it? And I give an example where we can easily trick an LLM into lying. So I'll pause there for half a tick. All right, so obviously we need to do something about this. You know, what we have is the school environment is everyone, you know, it's overworked and underpaid, and it's you know, there's mostly it's putting fires out every day. But this is a great disruption which is inevitable, and so requires some further consideration. The EdSAFE Alliance has global membership, and we've created a policy development framework, and that we're going to go through that very briefly here, but that's just to give you a sense of the range of groups that are involved. So I talk to a lot of schools as well as policymakers, and these three things are some of the concerns that schools have. And we'll talk a little bit about academic integrity, truth, and educational quality out of these particular things, out of the LLMs. But schools are also concerned in the wider areas of policy for privacy, bias, safety, consent, accountability, etc. I should also say these. I'm not expecting people to read all these slides, you know, as we go. I've done an analysis of many different policies, and here is a summary of 24 of them as to what are the principles that people are looking at needing to be put in place to help us manage this transition. The Australian government has its own set that it's put in place, and which actually you'll note is fairly similar. And interestingly, there are two Australian government task force, the AI task force, which has got the Deputy Secretaries of Education, and they're likely going to produce what will be another set of principles. I'm sure that, and which are, you know, sensible, principles. But in my experience, there's a big gap between those principles and what schools need to do day to day now to make things kind of right for their school staff, students, and community. I should say the second task force, there's a House of Representatives task force that's going on, which is trying to delve into the issues in more detail. This is a big issue for everyone, and we can see that Jacinta Collins sort of agrees with the same set of basic issues. Privacy, equity, and misuse is the kind of principles. But what is good about what Jacinta's done is she then moved into, we need to think about how this affects the curriculum, student engagement, assessment, and various automation. So, you know, we've got a kind of framework, you know, that people are coalescing around. Question is now, how do we make action on that? And I pause here if you guys dug. No.
Oh, Dan, I was just thinking, you know, the long chain. You were mentioning the long chain there, so that enables us to have an open source AI chatbot, for example, running across our own databases. And as long as we've got the right models and the right you know, they're really good data sets that have quality material, we could be using them right now as a research project to pull up and make more efficient the generation of artifacts from our own information. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And I think that's some of the projects that we're going to talk about, later on. So thank you. All right. So the three phases of policy, development. Well, most people know that policy development, is much longer than that and starts from what you need, creating objectives, then getting down into definitions, then getting across to other definitions, and then enactment, and then legislation, and then enforcement, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very long process. So what we've built is something that's much simpler. What do we need to do now? Which is activate. What do we need to learn about so that we can do something, so we can implement something that's correct? And what Bede we were just raising there, that kind of we need to do research into what's the right way to implement a LangChain bot would be in there. And then in longer term, we've got issues that are around truth and quality and who owns and that in a longer term view. Base safety is a concept that basically is saying we already do IT, so there should be some things that we can extend to this. Right? We already manage data protection, etc. So base safety basically has consent, it has an access control system, and then it has sort of accreditations that might be a lot like the safer technology for schools that the organization I founded, EdSAFE has, which helps people go and assess whether an application is appropriate, because there's going to be a lot of applications that have AI backing them, and they might change which model they're using day to day. Even so we have to find a model for understanding the difference between the front end application and a back end LLM, and who's responsible for what. So we need some of these sort of accreditations, as well as using the access system, so that we can just tell what students are doing when they're on our networks, interacting with these things, or even staff. So we need to be able to have those kind of accountability frameworks. But then we also have we want to be able to put quality and ethical considerations across the top of these things as well, which is a lot more complicated. But we've got some processes to at least get started with that. And as Bede, you were raising, ground truth from our own data is one of those things that we should be looking towards enabling. So then we move into the second box, the active research, and that is where we want to be able to look at what has most impact. We don't want to just accept what the industry is giving us. We want to be able to define what impact looks like for us. What does good look like? And we want to be able to, we should only, take these things when they're actually doing that. So as we move from generic chatbots into AI agents, that's what we need to be thinking about. And we also say that these are supposed to save time. And we'll talk a little bit about this thing called the AI dividend that comes from those time. But always mindful that this has downsides. So people, right, there's so much going on in classrooms, with people doing lots and lots of different ideas about how to use this stuff. I think that we need to pull ourselves up and go, if what we're doing now takes 100% of time, and what we're saying is, like IBM saying that, it's going to save them 30% of time. What does a future look like when what we're doing now takes less time? Do we want a future where that just gets filled up again with other stuff? Or do we want to look at the AI dividend and say, what are the specific things that we want to improve? It might be teaching maths in regional areas, teacher retention. It might be reducing the equity gap or increasing, support for diversity. There's lots of different things we can look at, but what we basically need to start doing is saying, our current systems are systems limited by these particular constraints, the performance constraints, because of time. But what does it look like if we have an education system that throws off some of those constraints? So the kinds of things that will happen to get there is reducing of admin workload, new practices, and new transformational ways of measuring things, as well as a whole range of other tools and functions that people have been asking education to provide in the longer term. But so to give you a tangible example of what I mean with that big arrow and all of those staples, I've used the calculator example, which is these are teachers who are protesting the introduction for a calculator because they didn't think that they could assess how students were succeeding. It was about assessment being a constraint on learning. And if we think back to the academic integrity stuff that people are worried about, that to me looks a little bit similar. So they were banned and then they were mandated, not introduced, not opt-in, mandated. What happened between those two states? That is it. Show your work. So what this did was it had a set of second order effects that people weren't expecting. By show your work, what happened was teachers could see when students had misconceptions, and then they could give them feedback. And then the students learned faster and the teaching got more effective, and students were able to complete higher order mathematical functions. All of a sudden, by having an assistive tool, the quality of what the teachers could know and be able to do increased. I think this is seminal for what education is going to experience and what we should be thinking about with the AI dividend. So where might it exist in the school ecosystem? This is just a way of looking at the school ecosystem. Parents up the top, learning environment over here, admin over here. So what we can do is map onto it, different functions. So enrollment, grade books, the assignment management in the learning center. So where are the bots? Where is the agents coming from right now? Where are they coming from? Tutors. Basically out in the parent space. Where do I think that we want to be focusing? In here, things to help the teachers. What are the things that are going to be, effective there before we get to the kind of agents that might be able to help teachers and interact with students directly. So I'm not as worried about the essay writing because I think this is going to be something that we can detect, and I'm going to talk about that next. But I think we're going to have solutions for high stakes exams and high stakes environments where we do actually want to have the students work. And there's already tools that are coming out to support tracking what students type, what they paste, and they do that over a course of a week, so they can see what the students have been doing. But there's also going to be a change in the way we design assessments and the way we do the kind of activities so that we can have a show your work type environment. So one of the databases that we're going to be able to chat to, this is an example that was posted yesterday from a group that I've been doing some research with, is looking at how they can put together a whole range of student progress indicators so that we can see whether students might be engaging with assessment, the AI, in a way that's impacting their assessment detrimentally. Because if they're interacting with AI and it's improving their learning, that's a good thing. We should probably know that. But we're worried about cheating only because we believe it's going to harm the students. So there's a suggestion that we can take, a longitudinal look at external, internal kinds of things and make that a way of knowing where to look for at-risk kids, but also those that might be overusing Gen AI. There's a whole lot of other, services. So this is your bot. Here it is. So we take our documents, we create a knowledge graph, and then you can have a chat with your textbook and ask it questions and get answers, etc. Here's another example where it's being used to work out whether a student's answer, if they're doing short answers, is actually comparable with the answer that you're looking for. So making your quizzes more open-ended, but also able to cope with different student kinds of answers. So there's a lot of different kinds of agents and things that are coming. One that I believe is going to be quite significant is ones that help you, manage meetings, manage to-dos, record your notes, synthesize what's going to be done, and maybe check the policies of the school and systems to see whether what you're doing is in compliance. So we've got a whole set of these kind of research agents, and what would be great is if some things are coming up to your head, I'd love you to chuck them into the chat, and just to see whether there are some interesting ideas that pop up for you as things that you would like to see being created. But there's also second order effects that we talked about at the start, which is the downsides. So a salient example is where in the United States, they outsourced doing interim assessments to a software company. And so the teachers didn't have to do the assessments. And after a year or two of that, the teachers started thinking that progress on standards was not their issue. They basically outsourced accountability. So efficiencies can have second order effects that we need to be thinking about, which is why we need to be doing some of this research now. So there's a lot of possible second order effects that we will talk about, and we can all talk about together at a later date. So this is a summary. I'm not going to put it on it, but yellow is what is the base safety that we can do now. Blue is stuff that we can do as part of research. And that depends on, and we'll see it's different across each part of the school. We've got more that we can do now for school administration, but it's going to take us longer to do, and more research in the assessment phase, to get that right. So it's not going to all happen at once. It's going to be at different paces and different locations. So finally, last thing, who owns your truth? And this is effectively a call to being able to say, we need to start thinking about how these things get deployed and implemented in our systems, and what functions we want over time. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Look, I know that some of that was a little bit technical, but I think you've really framed the conversation really well, provided a little bit of technical detail about how these things work. But from my perspective, the most interesting part was when you started to apply or articulate how some of these tools could be applied to the work of in the education field, and mapping all of those processes and understanding how AI could actually benefit in particular use cases is the thing that really interests me. But of course, the other thing comes back to governance. Look, I might kick it off by, and I know that Karen and the team are looking at quick questions from the chat, but can I kick it off and say, you've been involved in all these conversations around the world, right? You're a technologist. Are you more, on a scale, are you more excited or are you more scared? Do you think that this AI genie needs to be put back in its bottle, or are you just excited about the way things are going to go if we can control it properly?
It depends. Of course. It's not going back in the bottle, so it's inevitable, and so therefore, it's a bit like being tied to the rail tracks as the train's coming. We need to get untied and get off from out from under it. I think we need, as I said, to design our future and to be cognizant of the changes that it's going to bring for us, and that those aren't going to happen in the next 6 months, right? This is going to be relentless over the next number of years. And so software, as we know it, is going to be absolutely revolutionized.
I know that lots of specialists that have worked in the field have even signed public declarations warning governments about the negative aspects of AI. I suppose your contribution to the AI EdSAFE AI Alliance, I suppose, is trying to moderate the excitement about the utilisation of it, but at the same time understand what the guardrails might be over time. Listen, you mentioned large language models, and that was more than 5 minutes, by the way. That was 8 minutes you took to give that explanation.
Thank you.
But they're now talking about not large language models, but large foundational models. Can you just talk about, just briefly, what that means, what the difference is?
That's a great question, Greg. A foundation, what they've discovered is that when we teach something language, it learns concepts, but those concepts apply in vision and in pictures. So the same covering up of different things is how it can now guess what's behind the pictures. So like with your head, I can guess what's behind you because there's a window there,
This is a fake background there.
Fake background, right? But what that means is it's learnt to see. And so when it was doing a test that was written in text, it was getting about 70% of the questions right. When we gave the large language model vision and it started to see the exam paper, it was getting over 90% of the questions right. So what we're seeing is a fundamental shift in our understanding of how those things evolve. So we've got sound coming, we've got sensors coming, and we have movement coming. All of those things, these models are learning and learning at a greater and faster rate, which is now why we call them a foundational model.
Great, thank you.
Dan, terrific presentation. I've got a million things going through my mind, but I did notice that earlier on you outlined some of the potential benefits that AI could bring the education sector, and that's really exciting for many people on this Zoom. But I just hope you might just briefly be able to expand on what future use of AI you envisage within education and what's likely to be developed first.
That's a good question. What's going to be developed first? I think the things that are going to be developed first will be probably generic kinds of support functions for administration. So we're going to see the increase of tools that can help you run meetings, tools that can help interact with textbooks and some basic stuff. But it does, as you said, open up the possibilities for future elements. And my excitement, having education measurement, is really around the change that we can do to assessment, so that we can value more of what students learn, and really over time evolve our system of measurement and encouragement that we can give to students.
Yeah, so Dan, you've been interacting on the world stage in this, and I guess I'm interested, and I'm sure others are, about what governments from across the globe are thinking. How are they responding to the prospect of AI in education? Are they regulating and legislating its use? Is that something that is starting to show its face around the world? So
yesterday, the European Commission took the next step with regulating AI. So yes, there is high level kind of regulation to deal with accountability and who to point at if things go wrong. Now, OpenAI has said they don't like this, and the analogy that I give is we're asking the car manufacturers to be responsible for the drivers when they run into a tree. So that there are certain things they keep pointing out it's very difficult to protect against, so therefore a range of policymakers are like deers in the headlights. They're really like, just tell me what to do, and then you tell them and they go, no, I can't have that. So there is a cycle that's going to happen as people learn what to do, and I think in Australia we're doing our best. But as I was saying before, we probably we can't look to the AI task force that's in place to solve all of the issues that us as a sector have and our schools have.
So Bede mentioned at the start, Dan, that you've been engaged with the minister's advisors, Jason Sinclair's advisors. I just wonder, what's that group starting to, is anything coming out of that, and can we expect what will land from that group? Can we be hopeful or?
Well, I think it was what I was mentioning before. It's a good question. You followed it up. I think what we will get is a useful set of principles that will have things like transparency and explainability and fairness, but and I hope that in there they break it down to things that systems and schools can actually do. So some actionable pieces. But I suspect that we're going to be left with a gap. We're going to be left with a gap between what we would like AIs to do and what teachers and students are doing with them. And as schools, we're going to have to work that policy gap together.
Thanks.
You talk about the response of education systems. I know that several departments of education have banned the use of ChatGPT within their networks, for example. And obviously, it doesn't prevent students and teachers from using it outside the network. Most of the Catholic education sector hasn't taken that step. In fact, I know Danielle Purdy from Max from Melbourne, she actually was quoted in an article arguing the case for the use of ChatGPT. And as I mentioned before, Mark Woolley from Wollongong did a CLO recently about the same thing. I probably know what you're going to answer about this, but do you think it's of any benefit trying to ban those sorts of tools at this stage?
No, I mean, I think but I do think it's a choice for each institution. I think they've got to come to their own come their own path to saying yes. It might take them some time. The key thing is, I think the concept of base safety, I think that they really, they need some support to being able to say, what were my kids doing? So accountability, tracking, and just the basic things that we expect from IT systems as it is right now, but also the educational framework so that students and teachers understand how unreliable these things can be and how they can improve the quality of responses they get from it.
Okay, so in the absence of government direction and regulation, what do you think we should be doing? Like you articulated a framework for policy development, but you also gave us those 3 steps about the base safety, then the playground, if you like, the research, and then finally leading to it. But you also said that the pace of things is going to operate in all sorts of different directions at different paces. So it seems like almost an iterative set of policy positions over time, potentially. Is that how you see it? Like we might advocate for using LangChain, for example, over our current databases as a bit of a innovation or a research, then take a next step and then adjust policy as we go. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. It's like a caterpillar of stuff, because each year there's going to be some sets of innovations that we didn't have before. Think of it just in a way of as new software being brought to you. You need to make an assessment of it before you just dump it in. So we will have the chat with a large language model where I'm asking a question and getting a response. That system has people will find its limitations and they'll find its uses. It will be able to create a good base, a base unit plan, but it won't know my kids. It won't know my curriculum. It won't know what I've achieved recently with them. So that's a good basic start. So people use it there, but over time, as we integrate it in, it'll start to learn. We will learn how to safely incorporate these other things so that it can be more informed and therefore being able to be guided better. And yes, so it will be in each area a kind of sort of caterpillar, but I believe that we should be doing as a group base safety right now.
So Dan, just to confirm, I'm just sort of seeking, and probably on behalf of everyone, and I must say it's really affirming to see so many people interested in giving up Thursday afternoon. So, all power to you, Dan, for your presentation, and you're obviously attracting people. So you're a hot commodity. Well done. But I put you on the spot. You mentioned a couple of things, but what clear advice? Have you got any clear advice for the Catholic sector? As we consider AI in education, because for me, working with schools at the moment, I can see there are some people who are, the gap is getting quite broad from those that know how to play with the tools and those that have no idea. And that the longer we wait, the greater that gap goes, and some kids will, be involved, some won't. Have you got any advice for the sector?
Well, as a sector, I think one of the first things we have to say is we will adopt AI as it becomes appropriate, right? And we want to clarify what appropriate looks like and means for us as a sector. Then we also want to start talking as a sector, because these things, to operate one, if we choose, maybe we don't, but if we choose to operate one, it's very, very expensive. And we've got to train it. So there may be investment, that has to be provided, or then you've got the actual professional development of teachers. And I think that instead of traditional professional development of teachers, we could look at using the tool to teach the tool. So there's a way of potentially having our own bot that actually takes you through how to use this basically with your class, how to do a lesson plan, how to do some stuff, how to perhaps create a set of questions and distractors and all these basic little use cases where teachers could have that teacher agent, their Learn AI agent. We've created it because we can create the documents that we want it to do. And that could be the research project that Bede was talking about in terms of creating our own use of documents and to train a system.
All right, Dan. Well, look, there's a fair few comments and questions in the chat. I just might throw to Karen and the team to pose some of those to you as we move towards concluding the session.
Thanks, Bede. One of the questions we had recently was, Dan, what are some of the guidelines you can offer for us to engage with AI responsibly in the current stage of AI development?
That is tricky. To be responsible is to have a duty of care over the kids, I think, to start with. So we're not wanting to just throw it open, etc. So perhaps having a model of what does low level of AI look like versus medium versus higher versus full. So a scale for how to use AI with your kids. So starting with, no, you shouldn't be using it because this is for this assignment. I don't want you to do it for this assignment. Through to, perhaps do some brainstorming with some ideas with it. Through to, hey, you could do a draft. I want you to improve a draft, of something. And so having a consciousness of where the tool could actually fit with your students well before you're, asking them to engage with it, I think would be a good idea.
Thanks, Dan. In the chat, we've also got some people that have said they've used ChatGPT to create the basis of an exam. And others have said they've done the same thing with great results. And a lot of other people are just talking a little bit about the implementation of things like Scribo and other AI tools and things like that. So that's probably a bit of a summary at the moment. I did put in the chat earlier on how people felt about it, and we've got quite a few exciteds.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah, it's interesting. Wollongong actually use Scribo across many of our schools. I don't know the take up and utilization, but it works in concert with a dashboard tool which goes with it called Literatu. But as I understand it, yeah, it makes assessments of students' writing materials and provides assistance around improving it. I suppose where I see it, the development of AI is the dream would be that it's easier for teachers to have information in front of them that directly relates to a particular concept or a particular skill deficiency within a student, and provides the teacher with the easy capacity to understand what's the next step for that kid. So there's true differentiation, ultimately down to the individual student level rather than a class or a subset of a class. But that's just one of the use cases that you described in that diagram, Dan. That's only just one thing. Yeah.
As I opened, it's going to impact each of the processes that we do, and eventually it might actually start to change the structures that we think are permanent. It may well, get to a point where, because we have more confidence in students' progress and being able to measure that in many different ways, that having everything being taught in domains and having everything in strict timetables might start to be constraints that get loosened as we can trust that students learn in different ways.
Great. So, Karen, are there any other comments or queries from the chat that you think are relevant at this stage that haven't already been covered by Dan's presentation or Doug's questions?
Just one that's popped in now. Obviously, there is a cost in developing all of these AI tools. Do you foresee companies starting to charge a cost for the use of these tools? And do you foresee these costs being passed on to schools as they become used more regularly?
No, CNET will do it all for all the CNET membership, I'm sure. I know that a couple of CNET people are on the line. Back to you, Dan, sorry.
The bottom line is OpenAI is losing billions and billions to make it free. It is expensive. Imagine what's going to happen is you're going to get AI tools on top of existing tools, and you have your standard tool. And if you want the AI, it's going to cost you $20 a month extra. And then you're going to have multiple of those because you're going to have this tool, this tool, this tool. It's going to be cost management of these things is going to be an issue. And if you've got, if you're running something as an organization and you've got one user that's running large contexts, so large textbooks that it's putting into it or something like that, and doing it repeatedly, that could cost a lot of infrastructure time. So management of those kind of costs will become one of the exercises that we need to do as an organization.
Any other final comments or chats or questions, Karen?
Just another one that's popped in. Teachers are very time poor. Using AI to help teachers with administration, planning, marking, etc., could mean that more time becomes available for catering to students' individual needs, student well-being. And I also think that it might free up a little bit of time to think about some of those higher order things that students can be doing as well. And also potentially teachers, it might change the conversation from some of the organisational things that we talk about now to some of the higher order things.
And with Dan coming from a pedigree of teachers, he also understands, that's why he focused, I think, on the fact that we might look at assessment completely different. So, we're not focusing on facts at all. We're focusing on an individual student's capacities to interface with data and information and then produce other products as a result.
Dan, just
another
question from me. Sorry, Karen. Often teachers and educators need to see what it looks like when it's working. So a lot of what we're talking about conceptually sounds fantastic, but in practical terms, it's when things start to, people can see them even in pilot phases. Is that things, are you seeing examples of that happening where there are pilot groups around the world that are exploring without spending masses on infrastructure? Are there ways of doing that early on to try and establish a coalition of the willing, so to speak, to move down that path? Because it's probably going to be too big for any one, school or even a diocese to do. It needs that combination.
So I've got on my screen here, I can show you some amazing tutors for students, and I've also got an example of a meeting management and task organization bot. They've got videos of both of them. I think people will be surprised at how simple these sort of things look. Where currently the kinds of things that they're talking about is a way of talking and a way of interacting, and these are becoming more like visual kinds of visually driven, empathetic, conversational, but it's conversation driven by data. So that's what. Anyway, I want to I'll have a look for Synthesis Tutor as an example, and if you watch that 1 minute 22 and are not almost a little bit like you've just won the grand final, if you're not like that at the end of this, I don't know that you're human. The engagement they managed to get with the kids is amazing.
Actually, just as we finish off, I know Damien put something in the chat there about the importance, if we were to do something like that LangChain, research project I talked about, it really speaks to the quality of our own data and cleaning up everything within our own repositories, doesn't it? I think Damien mentioned that, I think, in the chat, which is something that I've spoken about internally here. You'd agree with that, Dan, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I saw also a notion, somebody asking a question about data protection, which again, which drives us towards this question of sovereignty, or at least tenanting of foundational models. So there are questions around that again need to be researched, and we need to be able to, as a group, get confident.
Sure. All right. Well, look, we might close it off there. I know that we're just a little bit over time, but can I close by particularly thanking you, Dan? I know that you're very busy with all of the consultancy work that you're doing for various people and flying across to, wherever next to talk to people. But from my perspective, I just wanted to also say how much I think our sector, because you've been dealing with our sector for a long time at the back end. Many people might not know that, but we appreciate, I suppose, the fact that someone of your caliber and an Aussie is so much involved in the EdSAFE AI Alliance at the international sphere. I think that's really positive. Can I also thank Doug for being part of this? I know that was a bit of a challenge in between all of your meetings, Doug, but thanks very much for joining me on this excursion, if you like. Can I thank all of those people that have participated this afternoon and put your suggestions in the chat? Really appreciated the opportunity for you to be here this afternoon. And of course, I have to thank Karen and the gang, the whole CNET Learning Online team, Frank for his initial organisation. Really appreciate that too. And in closing, can I just share something with you as a bit of an advertisement for you as well? Just so that you know, there is a future Catholic Learning Online CNET event featuring Google, talking Google Australia, that is, not your Google, Dan, talking about how they are looking at AI in education, a bit of a deep dive. So that's for the e-learning working group and IT, coming up on Wednesday, the 26th of July. And as I close, I just thought I might share with you Dan's contact details. He's happy for people to drop him a line. This is costing me a lot of money to have Dan.
Oh God, really?
It's going to cost me a lot in terms of a couple of drinks at some stage when we catch up. But no, he's doing this for free for us, for the Catholic sector this afternoon. But if you do want to interface with Dan, he provides various services as well as his free services that he provides, EdSAFE Alliance. There's his contact details, so I'll leave them there for the next little while if you want to take them down. And without anything else to say, all I can say is thanks very much for your participation, and I hope you all have a good late afternoon and evening. Thank you very much.
And Bede, I'd like to thank you for the work that you've put into getting this organised. And just a couple of other things. I've put into the chat an evaluation form so that we can feed that back to Bede, Dan and Doug. And finally, Dan, your QR code didn't work when people were scanning it before. So I'm just wondering if you might be able to flick it through to me. And then when I send the evaluation out to people in the recording, we can put the QR code in there as well.
Terrific. Thank you. I'll do that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon, evening.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Actually, you might stay on the call, Dan, actually.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to
Right. Well, thanks, Karen. That's the first one that I've been involved in, so I understand some of the technical challenges at the front end. But and we might explore in future ones whether we do use Zoom in that webinar mode as opposed to a big room, and see whether that's a more efficient way of doing it. But it was good to see all the faces. I have to say,
I've done plenty of webinars, and I can tell you, Bede, standing on the webinar and just being only the speakers is not nearly as good.
No, that's right. That's right.
Great response, Bede.
I think the numbers were good. The numbers that registered were far more than that, but then things happen. You know, it's an early afternoon session on a Thursday. It may be, Karen, that many of those people that registered, they'll be able to get the recording anyway and still be able to interface with the conversation that you had, Doug and I had with you, Dan, anyway.
I had about probably 40 people this afternoon email me to say they couldn't come along because of illness and sick kids and things like that. And we had people registering up until 3:45 this afternoon and emailing me asking why they didn't have the Zoom link.
Right. So yeah, it's probably longer lead time. But then again, I mean, talk with the group, Karen. It may be that another curated conversation with Dan about AI, and maybe with a couple of other players, like Danielle Purdy from Max or from, you know, other people, maybe something that might happen later on that we could schedule later on. But I was just so keen to sort of have this engagement with Dan at that level around governance and, you know, how we might put up guardrails and what our next steps might be. And I think I hope that people feel that hit the mark this afternoon. Whilst you didn't give them exactly do A, B, C, Dan, it was I think you gave a lot of food for thought and some structures and frameworks that they can then take away and research to implement at the local level. But for me, it also speaks to, do we do this at a Dyson level, at a school level, at a state level, at a national level? You know, for our sector. Now, you know, Doug, you and I have been through the pain of trying to herd cats on different things over time. But it does beg that question, I suppose.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I think this is about coalition of the willing. There are, you know, where you get people that are going to commit to whatever it looks like, whether it be, you know, because I think there's people that would be really willing if there was just a plan to at least have a way of engaging and maybe trying and get feedback. And the problem that I'd have is if this waits too long and we sit back and wait for everything to come to the sector, God only knows what will be happening. I've seen schools where they're starting to touch this stuff. Some people, other people aren't. There's no rules in the school. There's just a teacher that knows the stuff that's using it, the others that aren't. And I go to, because I'm working across colleges in Queensland, and no one has any real sense. They don't want to ban it, but they have no real sense of how to even respond.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's very true.
Yeah.
So
all right. So look, and Dan, as I said to you before, I'll have a chat with you in the coming days, but we certainly, Wollongong, that is, would like to talk to you about an engagement where we might do a couple of things, whether it's jointly through CNET or just with Wollongong. But there's some things that, you know, I just see that we need to move forward. And I think we've got some capability in Wollongong to sort of implement something that might be small that then we can share with everybody. And I'd be keen to sort of talk to you about that and engage you in some sort of work around that over time. Yeah. But you're chock busy with all sorts of. But that would just be a favour to me, right? That would just be a personal.
That would be just a favour. Of course it would.
I was going to make a comment early on, Dan, when you did make about the background behind Bede's head, but I just thought I just was tempted, but I stopped myself, Bede. I really stopped myself. All right, I'm going to go, fella. See you.
Right, thanks very much. And Doug, thanks very much for being involved in that, mate.
Oh, look, I'm keen. You know, I'm really interested in this. So, yeah.
Right.
So reach out if your colleges, you know, and if you see people who want to be part of a coalition of willing, because it needs people like you to help us create that.
Yeah. Had a couple of principles there, so that was good. So that was great.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Karen. That's great. Thanks, Dan. We'll talk soon.
You're very welcome. And Bede, I really like your idea of doing some sort of action research in this area, particularly classroom based, because I just think it's really powerful.
Yeah, but I just think that if we've got an AI tool looking at our own databases and we could test, you know, what it looks like. So for example, instead of using ChatGPT to ask, develop a lesson plan around the importance of the Eucharist to, Catholic faith, like for example, and you scoured the internet, you get all sorts of different responses. But if it was scouring just our information, you'd think that it would give a much more, qualitative, sound response.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
All right, Karen, thank you very much for doing all that. That's really appreciated.
You're very welcome. And I think that we should look at doing some more sessions in term 3 and term 4.
Sure, no problem.
All right.
All the best to you.
Thanks, Bede. Cheers.
Bye.